Conversations for change. Because the world is ready. Well, I am super excited to have my dear friend Trenda Owens with me here today. And we would like to have a conversation that we've sort of been having a little bit at a time over recent weeks about the whole subject of death and how what we've come to understand is that death is the big scary and it doesn't have to be. So Trenda, thank you so much for joining me today. I love you and I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, thank you so much, Becky. And it is such a pleasure to be here on your podcast.
Thank you. So we are going to talk a little bit later about an experience you had recently around this whole topic of death. But before we get to that, one of the things that we've noticed is that this really is one of those big, scary topics for people. And I guess what we could say is we know that's true because in this culture, nobody talks about it.
Agreed.
And I remember going through because both my parents have passed. And I do remember that at the time of their passings, the world really wants this to move quickly. It's like from the moment that somebody's died, then there's, very quickly going to be some kind of arrangement for a funeral and then a celebration. The celebration may come later, but this whole idea of like getting it over with it seems to be a part of the fear, right? It's like we really want to have as little attention as possible on the topic of death. And I think we're doing ourselves a huge disservice because I think you and I would agree, first of all, there is no such thing.
Yes, totally agree with that. And I think that this is something that it needs to come out into the open. Um, let's talk about it because, as you can see, most people shy away from this discussion and even the topic altogether.
Yeah, they do. And I think, when my dad was dying, he died in 2004. And at the time, I had been doing a lot of journaling and I was actually working on a draft for a book. And I was doing automatic writing every morning. And that automatic writing was all about the fact that there is no death and really walking me through understanding that there is no death.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't been through that experience the way I was and did go through it, I might not understand as clearly as I do how real that is. But at the time that my dad died, first of all, I knew when he was dying. So that was one thing that was very interesting to me. I literally picked up the phone to call, and I ended up calling my brother because I knew my brother was at his house. And I didn't want to call the house phone because it was close to midnight where he was. But later, my brother, when he called me back, he asked me why I called when I called. And I said, I don't know. I just knew I had to call. And he said, I had called within seconds of when my dad died. And I felt it. I felt this huge wind come up. I went out on my back deck and this huge wind blew through. And I just stood there and I knew it was him. I knew.
Yes.
And the following morning, I had a whole experience of talking to my dad. So that was a huge confirmation because I had sent him a note before he died, which my brother had actually read to him the night of his passing. And in that note, I had said to him that there were no excuses. I knew where he was going, and I expected to hear from him. And I expected him to give our regards to all of our grandparents. And And so, sure enough, the next morning when I got up and sat outside in my morning ritual, I called him forth and he came. And I said, "So, Dad, how's the doing?" And he said, "I'm fine." And I said, "So, how is it?" And he said, "So, how's what?" And I said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous." And he said, "No, how's what?" And I said, "Being dead, of course." And he said, "Oh, is that what this is? I've never felt so alive." And I was just, I mean, I to tell you. And of course, I spent the day telling myself that I must have made the whole conversation up in my head because that's what we do. And certainly back then, that was what I did. But then I had a later confirmation from my eldest son who had had the same conversation with my dad as he was in that twilight space waking up that morning from his dreams.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew it was true. And I know that we all have this idea of loss because we lose that physical body, but we don't lose that connection.
Not at all. Not at all. And I mean, I'm so glad that you mentioned that because um, we are spirit, and spirit doesn't die. As a matter of fact, spirit chose these bodies to come into. So at some point, as they say, as sure as you're born, you will die. However, your spirit never dies. And that's the beauty of it all.
And you know, it's, I love that you say that because to me, it's just when we really come to it and understand, it's what gives this life the joy that it is, because this life is a gift. It isn't a given, and it isn't an only, and it isn't finite. The period that you get to be here has a beginning and an end. It's true. But the you that gets to experience gets to take all those experiences with you. And
Yes.
that's the power and the beauty of being here. And every living creature, I actually think, even the rocks, every part of what is here is alive. And I actually think that every part is doing the same thing, gathering these experiences and memories and understanding what it is to be God in this form.
Yes. Yes. Totally agree.
So it's kind of interesting that we get so uptight about the fact that we're going to leave. But I guess it makes sense when you realize that we're all so caught up in the external, what we look like, what it looks like out there, how much it's all about, right? How much stuff you have, how much money you have, whether you have the right body shape, whether you sound right. It's all about the external in this culture. And so that's led us so far astray.
Yes, it has. And it also depends on your upbringing as well. Because if you were brought up in the church, which I had, um, so there are certain stigmatisms about death and what that meant and the conditions of death and what was going to happen to you afterwards. Um, it's just beautiful to realize that some things just aren't true in life. And I don't blame anyone in regards to this because I do believe people are doing the best they could. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times this has just been generationally passed on and they told you what they knew.
Right, right.
But now I'm just so grateful that I'm aware and have realized that there isn't any truth to this. I mean, and it's like a breath of fresh air.
Right. And when you say there isn't any truth to this, you're talking about the tales that are told in church about if you don't go to church, you go to hell and that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, there are probably two major things that most people fear in life, and that is dying and going to hell.
Yeah.
And, the great news is that you don't have to fear either one.
Yeah. That is great news. And I think you're right, because I think most people have such low opinions of themselves, which is also a part of the whole culture that we're in. This idea that we're comparing ourselves. Um, I remember actually decades ago, Oprah Winfrey said it better than anybody had ever said it. We're comparing our insides with everybody else's outsides. And so we're all walking around going, I'm not good enough. I don't fit. I'm a terrible person. And we know inside all the bad thoughts we've had and all the places where we've fallen down and failed to be the perfect child, the perfect son, daughter, mother, father, sister, brother, all those things. And so we assume that because we're not perfect, we are going to go to hell. I think that for the people who are caught in that whole thing of the church, that the standards are so high of what it takes not to go to hell, that
Right.
that most people just assume, not to mention the fact that, as my dad always used to just rail against, that, they condemn babies from the moment they're born. They're
Mhm.
born in sin. And my dad
Right.
used to lose it over that. He was like, haven't any of these people ever seen a baby? Love babies. And who doesn't love babies? Because babies
Exactly.
are God. I mean, I just look at them. They are so clean. They have none of the teachings of that first 7 years of propaganda that they're about to get. Oh dear.
You're right.
You know? So yeah, so everybody's afraid to die. And part of why they're afraid to die is because they're sure they haven't lived up to what they should have. And so they're going to go to hell and damnation. What a
Mhm.
terrible bind.
Honestly, it's one of the worst things that I really believe that has been impressed on all of us, you
Yeah.
know. And like I said, the great news is there's no hell. And I remember having a conversation with my mom. She's 84 now, and she said, the best day of my life was when I realized there's not a hell. She said, I and you know what? She's absolutely right, because in her generation that was prevalent. It was very prevalent,
Oh
and
yeah.
there was no negotiating that.
Right.
So
Right.
now I mean I'm glad that she was here to actually get to that point to realize that there isn't a hell, and that God is the loving God that you had expected. Is he And matter of fact, we are God. And when she had to wrap her head around that one, she was like, okay. It took her a while, but she goes, okay. She said, okay, let's start with I'm a spark of God. She said, I'll start there.
That's a perfect place to
And
start.
and and that was a perfect place to start.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. I'm a spark of God. That's exactly what each of us is.
Mhm.
And when we understand that, then everything begins to change. Everything
Exactly.
begins to change. And it's interesting that you're saying those things, because it's making me think also of the other side of that. If you don't have the hell and damnation, or you don't believe it, like my dad was totally opposed to those ideas, to the point that I don't think he believed in that. I don't think he worried about hell, but I think he was the intellect who
Mhm.
believed there was nothing, the big sleep. You close your eyes one last time and it's over.
Mhm.
And I'm quite sure that's what he thought would happen when he died. And what I can tell you, because I have had relationship with him ever since he died, is that that has not been true. And in
Mhm.
fact, he has had a blast. And I have had experiences of interacting with him when he was practicing his soft shoe dancing, which he used to love to do, listening to his jazz records, and
Mm-hmm.
just swinging by to see if I was in the mood to take a twirl and all kinds of things. So,
Yeah.
um, I mean, he even told me this whole experience. A girlfriend and I, one time, were talking on the phone, and he came into the phone call, and we both could feel him. And
Mm-hmm.
he started talking to her, and he was explaining to her that they had a prop room. They had built this prop room where they had all these props for death. They had a ball and chain. They had skeletons. They had all this stuff, and they were going around playing with each other with it. Right? They were going around like, "Whoa!" and scaring each other, but they weren't scaring each other at all. They were laughing their heads off. It was
Yeah.
so funny. So yes, it's quite clear that that is not the big sleep that is over, and there it's just darkness and your consciousness is gone, is also not how it works.
Right.
So I really would love to hear this adventure that you've recently been on, where you actually got to witness this transition, as I understand it. Is that what happened?
Yes, that's correct. Um, Actually, it happened on the early morning of January 8th. Um, I was asleep and something had arisen in me that I just felt myself traveling. And I found myself in my cousin's hospital room. And he was in bad shape. He was not, the doctors really didn't know what was wrong with him, but he had developed boils all over his body. And, they had no explanation for it. But he was not in any pain or anything. He was in a coma. And I could see him lying there in that hospital bed. And all of a sudden, this vapor just came out of his body. And I thought, oh my goodness. And it just risen. And what happened with the vapor rising, I was like, oh my gosh, he's transitioning. And he acknowledged me. And that was so strange because I was like, oh my God, he can see me. And he waved at me. And what happened was that these entities just start coming all in the room. I noticed actually his father and his mother, and they were like, I guess they were angels because they were really tall beings. And it was funny because it was like they called his name and they were clapping and they said, "Congratulations, you graduated." And I
Huh.
saw this, and then they just rose up, and next thing I know, I was back in my bed, and I thought he graduated. That's all I kept. I thought he graduated, and so something I instinctively said, look at the time, and I looked at my clock, and it said 1:22. So I didn't think anything more of it. I went back to sleep. That morning, a phone call came in at 6:58, and it was his brother, Ed, Eddie's brother, called to let us know that he passed. And my mother was, talking to him. She goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry that this happened, and I know he'll be missed," and giving her condolences. And I could hear the conversation, and I told her, I said, and she was about to tell me what happened. I said, "Don't tell me." I said, "I know." Eddie, I said, "Eddie passed." I said, "He transitioned." I said, "I was there a little before 1:22, so I don't know how long I was there." I said, "But it happened during that time." And she said, "You're right." She said, "He died at between 4 and 4:30 that morning." And And I thought, okay, well, that makes sense because they live in Lima, Ohio, and I'm in California. So it's a
3 hours.
3 hour difference in their time. They're on Eastern time. So I was like, bingo, I knew it. But I was so excited to tell her. I said, yeah, I know he died. I said, but let me tell you what happened. I said, it was like vapor coming right out of his body. And she was like, really? And when I went on further to tell her the reunion that he had, I said, and they were clapping, calling his name, saying he graduated. And she said, wow. She said, now that's something to celebrate. This is how we should go. This is how we should look forward to death. This is
Exactly.
this is just a graduation for us.
Yeah. And if you think about it, it makes so much sense because, especially right now, as we see that we are all moving into a whole new realm of being on this planet. Um, there's no question, there's big change coming.
Mm.
And when you go right back into spirit, you're, you're there.
Mm-hmm.
It's, it really is like taking off that old pair of shoes that are just a little too tight.
Right.
And there you
Exactly.
go. And I wonder sometimes if we don't all be carrying this fear of death simply because if we didn't, so many of us would just look around and say, I don't know what I thought I was signing up for, but I'm not going to do it. I'm leaving. Because sometimes it can be really hard down here, especially over this last period we're coming to the end of now. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, look at the difficulty and the darkness that's been on us. We've all these wars and these just so much challenge and struggle that we've been willing to go through to learn and grow because that's our nature. It's the only thing
Right.
we can do, really.
Well, looking at it I look at it from a slightly different standpoint because if we think about it, the Earth only used to have maybe two, maybe three um, billion people on it, and now it's what 9? We're up to
Close
maybe
to it.
9 billion, I think it is. So this, I believe, had to happen because there is so much turmoil throughout many generations, and we all come to help clean this up.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
And like they said, it's going to take an army to do that. That we're the army.
Yeah.
We're it,
And
and
that's why.
we signed up for it.
Mhm.
That's the beauty of this. We agreed to come here at this pivotal time because we knew that this is going to be huge in history, and not only that, not just for Earth, which Earth, she has been very tolerant of us. But yes, I am very excited that Earth gets to have wear put on a brand new dress. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And and it's going to be beautiful. But it's going to take all of us to get us through this. And it is it. You can look at it one or two ways. Yeah, it does. It's a different transition again for us in the flesh, but and we're going to transition as well. But this is a situation where we actually get to combine our higher selves in this body living. And I think that that is huge because it hasn't been done before.
Right. Right.
So I think that this is such a lovely time. And I know people may be in angst about some of the things that are happening now, but all of this is no surprise. We came here for this.
Exactly. No, and I think I don't know if it's the only time we've ever had that higher selves or higher beings have embodied, but certainly it's the first time that humans have taken ourselves through this sort of change
Hmm.
while we're in our bodies.
Agreed.
And I think, I mean, I just look at the level of change that's happened in terms of my own awareness and my own abilities to
Hmm.
perceive over never mind over a lifetime. I've had a lifetime of experiences um, that have changed the way I see the world, no question.
Hmm.
Um, but because they were isolated over many decades, it wasn't like I had a series of events all happen in 1 week or 1 year and went, okay, now I know. No, I would have an event here and then a couple of years later another. And gradually it began to make sense to me. Okay, when I put all of this together and really
Hmm.
look at it, and it's amazing how easy it is in a lifetime to go right back to business as usual and forget these events that have given you insight. That's
Right.
one thing I'll say. Um,
Hmm.
because when I look back from where I am now and how much I've been able to comprehend and shift my understanding, um, it kind of makes me laugh that these other experiences that I had just came and went and was like, hello, hello, are you paying any attention? So there is that. I think we all have that going on just because we're in a very busy world. But
Yes.
yeah, there's no question that we've all come for this. And I have to say, one of the things I find myself saying, and I don't know how you feel about it, but for me, I literally have many, many, many days in the last year or two where I wake up and I am so excited to be here. I could not be happier that I am alive in this time.
Yes.
Um, that's really how I feel. I am not at all in a place of remorse or regret about the fact that I'm here, and I'm not about to let go.
Mhm.
There's way too much good stuff coming. And this beautiful story that you've told is just such a brilliant example of that, because we're getting to, as we become more and more aligned with our own inner highest being self, we
Mhm.
are able to perceive at higher and higher levels what's really going on. And
Yes.
that's so exciting.
It is exciting. Very much so.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm having experiences that are showing me that consistently now. And also the synchronicities, all these things that are just showing me that, number one, I know now without any question, there is no such thing as death. There is leaving the physical plane. That
Mhm.
happens. But the
Mhm.
physical plane has always been a place where people come and go. All things here come and go, right? As we could say, the one constant here is change.
Yes, for sure.
So yeah. Well, I'm really so excited that you got to actually experience this whole transition firsthand like that.
I
And
know. And that's exactly why I had to share it because if this will give solace to anyone in regards to if they have a loved one
mhm,
who may be very close to transitioning, do know there isn't anything to fear, that we all will go through this and we too will graduate.
yeah. Yep. Everybody gets to graduate.
Yeah. So speaking of which, in regards to graduation, we had a discussion at some point a while back, and it just clicked that maybe we should speak a little bit about that as well.
Mhm.
where we we have many different exit points. And when I say exit points, in which we as humans may have been put in a situation where we could have died doing something or being somewhere, or you just missed it, but that wasn't your exit point.
Right.
I do truly believe that we know when we are going to die, that we've agreed to that timing, and that there could be many exit points throughout your life.
Right. So, in other words, there are many options, and you set up several ways that that can happen, and then you know the one that you're going to choose or not choose in the
Right.
moment. Yeah,
Exactly.
I absolutely agree with that because I've had several experiences in my life where I've clearly been on what I think of as the exit ramp, and it didn't happen. Um, and it's interesting to me because I think a lot of the near death experiences demonstrate this, right? Where people
Yes.
actually die and then they're like, it's like, sorry, you're not, it's not your time. You have to go back. And they never want to go back, you might notice. But yes, I've definitely had those. I had one of those recently in a car accident last fall, and there was no question. And I saw it. And it's interesting because you, in the moment that it was happening, I could experience what the world would be if I chose it as the exit. And it was so clearly a no. And I was literally screaming, no, no. And miraculously, there was a terrible car accident, but we walked away. Everybody walked away. And even the insurance guys called us after, because they had to get the pictures of the car and then tell us whether the cars were totaled and yada yada. And the accident was caused by the other driver. They hit us. Um, but yeah, the insurance people, when they called, were like, wow, and you guys aren't in the hospital? We're like, nope, we're not in the hospital. And they said, well, you are some kind of lucky because both cars were totaled. And I had a similar experience when I was, wow, very young, when my kids were little. I must have been like 1991. So I was in my early 30s and I was swimming in the ocean and I got caught in the riptide. And I swam and I swam and I swam and I knew I couldn't get out of it. And I remember just watching this cliff face in front of me not moving, right? I would swim, but it wouldn't get any closer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And finally, I just said, okay, I surrender. And in the moment that I said that, somebody grabbed me and pulled
Wow.
me out of the water. And
Wow.
yeah, so exactly, when it's your time, it's your time, and if it's not your time, something will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be reassuring, but it can also be really hard for people who lose friends or children. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like to lose a child, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've never had to live through that. But to know that you, yes, you lose the physical, but you never lose the connection. I think
That's true.
that's a huge thing to know. And I think we've created death to be such well, such a boogeyman, frankly,
Mm-hmm.
that it's really difficult in our culture to talk about it, to acknowledge it, or to come to the place which is really the place we have to be ultimately to accept it. Because that old saying, there are two things you can count on: death and taxes. Well, death is the first one. So if we know it's going to happen, it's kind of crazy for us to all be acting as if it's this terrible thing, because it's
Right.
not.
It isn't. It isn't. And not only that, I think um, something that you shared earlier about your father is that they're just not in the body, but they're still near us. They're around. They're here. They're
Yeah,
saying we're just as alive as you guys. We're just in a different form now.
exactly. That the biggest thing is that we do know that not only do we not die, but that we are reunited.
Yes.
And that on the level that we're reunited is the level that matters, because we can feel each other.
Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, we can't hold their hand anymore. We can't hug them, but we can feel them.
For sure. That's truly a gift.
Mhm. Well, this has been fun. And I'm really glad that we had a chance to talk about it. I mean, fun might not be the right word for talking about death, but I think ultimately we should be able to get to the place where it is.
Agreed.
Because, right, for those who are dead, they would say it is.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. As a matter of fact, they probably appreciate the fact that we're talking about it because now they can say, okay, you have so many other things to think about. Don't fear death. Don't
Right,
waste your time doing that.
exactly. Well, thank you so much, Trenda. I really appreciate you taking the time with me today. And
Oh,
this was really fun. I really enjoyed it.
no, I'm so glad that we had this conversation as well because I do hope that it has lightened the perception for those out there who's on the fence, don't know, who still kind of fear death. Just let you
Right.
know that it's nothing to fear and that your loved ones is always around you.
Well, that's certainly my experience.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me on. This has been really fun for me as well.